So, Janet, let's start with the question. When law enforcement, and I'm not sure that most folks have an appreciation for this, when law enforcement sees a growing threat, right, or phenomena that is taking place, whether it's potential for gang violence, whether it's terrorism related, what goes into the development of being prepared for that threat?
I mean, I think it really depends whether you're talking about, I'm assuming you're talking here about local law enforcement. So if it's a local law enforcement, is it local you're talking about, or are you talking about on a larger?
In a larger sense, I mean, and I think, to a certain extent, at least in the context of what you're talking about, the rise of white nationalism, I imagine there is a sort of a federal to local enforcement dynamic. But what is involved in this? Like, it's not just, oh, we got a phone call today, we're going to go out and get it. There needs to be some type of undergirding to be prepared for a situation like that.
Right. So certainly, the Department of Homeland Security, which is, the just a behemoth of an agency that's charged with protecting the United States from a whole variety of threats, but has been very focused since its inception on terrorism. Produces has a number of analysts, and those analysts are there to kind of both gather together intelligence from all these other agencies and also kind of look at whatever data they have and come up with these assessments of what the threat environment may be. They've produced, a whole variety of these over the years. Some of them may deal, say, with the threat of cyber attacks from members of the far left. That was one from sort of the late aughts period. And they also, back in 2009, came up with a report about what they called right-wing extremism, which was a very politically charged term. But what that was and what these assessments generally are, they kind of look at the overall scene using, say, FBI data, using other kinds of government data, and come up with like an advisory for their state and local partners in law enforcement. So they'll send that out and it'll go down to the sheriff's office, and it's going to go down to local police forces and those kinds of agencies, just to make them aware of a phenomenon that they have noticed that they think that law enforcement should be aware of.
Now, you open your story in the Times. You're talking about a lieutenant in a police force in Gainesville, Florida, or I guess he was working in an emergency operations center down there, and while waiting for the dealing with a hurricane, and he realized that law enforcement's handling of white supremacy was broken. What does that mean to a guy like that?
Well, this is a lieutenant on the Gainesville, Florida police force. He'd been a lieutenant. His name is Dan Stout. He'd been on the police force for almost 25 years. And he had heard right after Charlottesville in 2017, in August 2017, he'd heard that Richard Spencer was coming to Gainesville to a speech at the University of Florida. So he had been researching over the past month everything he could find about Richard Spencer, about his so-called alt-right movement, about the opponents to the alt-right movement, on the left. He had been going through multitudes of YouTube videos, looking at websites, and the reason he was doing all of this was because he actually could not find any government-issued reports. Like, there were no studies, there were no PowerPoint, slides. There was nothing that he could get from either the DHS or the Florida Department of Law Enforcement or the FBI that kind of explained to him who these people were, what he should be looking for. There was nothing specific. And so he was, and he was going through, basically open source reports to get information because he couldn't get information from the sort of the usual channels. And that is actually, a story that I was told not just by him, but by the sheriff, by other people in that community, that normally there's plenty of intelligence that they have available to them. But when it came to this issue, the best intelligence they could get was from journalists who were covering, far-right events or from people posting things on Twitter and on YouTube.
What was there? What if they all reported that, this seems to be broken? It's not in the channel. Like, how rare was that for them? Because I imagine, if I'm on a police force in maybe, I don't know, a smaller city, and maybe someone dies or ODs on a certain type of drug that had been laced with something, that had been cut, heroin that had been cut with some other drug that was killing people, that I could go online and see, oh, this was a problem in another city, or this was a warning issued by the feds or the DEA or something. So, how often do local police for law enforcement, how often do they go and look for resources about a problem that seems to be on their doorstep and not find it?
I think that's a really good question. And I think that certainly what you had in the 2016 and 2017 were a series of events happening across the country, in a lot of times on college campuses, where you'd have these kind of quote unquote free speech events that were, sponsored in one way or another by the members of the far right, that would be drawing out, huge numbers of people protesting them. And violence would happen at almost every one of these events, and there wasn't a tremendous amount of information sharing, it seems like, between departments. You would have expected, for example, that after a couple of them, there might have been sort of a federal advisory about, okay, we're seeing these kinds of events happening in Berkeley and in Huntington Beach, California, or in Portland, Oregon, or in any number of other places where protests were happening. And this is what you should look for. These are some of the individuals with criminal records who may be showing up because they've been showing up at a number of these places. You didn't see any. There was nothing like that. And so actually what happened in the Gainesville story is that Dan Stout got on the phone with his counterparts in Berkeley. He realized that, I'm not going to be able to deal with this unless I've learned from other people who have had this experience. And so he took it upon himself to make a bunch of phone calls to other cities that had sort of big alt-right events, Berkeley, California being one of the major ones. And he and a couple of colleagues, got the resources from their city government and flew out to Berkeley and spent a week with them, basically getting a training from their own, kind of counterparts. But they had to take that upon themselves. That was his idea. He took the initiative. That was not some kind of, sort of larger, official program. It was the initiative taken by this one local cop who was very concerned about his community and wanted to protect his community.
And to the extent that there have been, or there should be, national programs to facilitate that type of exchange of information, we have seen actually a pullback on that. We're going to take a break. When we come back, I want to ask you specifically, how dangerous is this threat how worried should we really be worried about this stuff? And why is it that this potential threat has been met with less than proactive work on behalf of the federal government? We're going to take a quick break. I'm Sam Seder. We'll be right back. Ring of Fire Radio.